Mr. President. I come to the floor today to maybe lower my own temperature, but explain what I was getting at in Judiciary Committee hearing this morning. We had the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, before the committee. And I have not been shy about some of my criticism for the Secretary of Homeland Security, really on two fronts. The thing I was primarily wanted to focus on, was the failure, in my opinion, of the FEMA response for Hurricane Helene, really across the Southeast, but particularly in North Carolina where it was hardest hit. So I went in thinking that I was going to talk a little bit about my frustration with Hurricane Helene. But then an hour before the hearing, after 30 days, when I sent a letter saying I also wanted detailed information on the operation so-called Charlotte's Web, which was identifying illegally present people and deporting them. Got no problem with that, by the way. What I've got a problem with is the how. But I got basically a "Dear Sir, Madam, or Small Child, thank you for asking questions we don't intend to answer them" response from the Secretary of Homeland Security. That did not make me happy. So I got to admit, when I got to the hearing, the heart rate was up a little bit. What I wanted to do in the hearing was talk about how I apply my professional experience to working here in the Senate. And I was going to give her a performance evaluation for her 14 months on the job. And I was going to use as evidence empirical information, stuff that we've found, hard to get, but stuff that we got. This is a graphic, Mr. President, of 3 different hurricane responses. Trump 1 had Florence and Matthew, devastating storms in North Carolina. You can see here, anytime you're in business, when you see outlays and expenditures kind of flat, that means an organization's doing a good job. In other words, we knew what the damage was, we had the money for it, they requested the reimbursement, they got it. That's what competent disaster management looks like. Under Secretary Noem and Helene, a $59 billion impact in North Carolina, that's what incompetence looks like. You can see the huge difference between obligations and outlays. Well, let's just translate this into human terms in North Carolina. That means a county that can't even balance its budget. Yancey County, one of the hardest hits. They're just looking for basic reimbursements now. And the Secretary has decided that every reimbursement in excess of $100,000 has to go across her desk before it's approved. It's almost unheard of. Maybe in violation of the law in terms of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, but it's certainly in violation of common sense. If you want to do a quick back of the napkin, do the math. Divide 100,000 into 59 billion. That's a lot of numbers, right? A lot of approvals. Really? The Homeland Security Secretary wants $100,000 increments for people who are suffering in Western North Carolina to be subject to her approval? That's what produces garbage like this. That's what gets people fired in the private sector, where I spent the majority of my career before I joined the state legislature in 2006. So on the disaster recovery front, Secretary Noem has failed miserably by empirical standards. Nothing personal. It could be my mother in this position. I'd have to fire my beloved mom. At the end of the day, this is horrible performance. And why it's horrible is it's not only facts and figures, this is people's lives. That she's decided paperwork and red tape is more important than flooding the zone and giving them money for removing debris, money for actually temporary housing, money for buyouts, the basic sorts of things that you have to do. But I was only going to talk briefly about that. I wanted to talk more about the main subject in Judiciary, and that was the response for these deportations. I'm angry with Secretary Noem because she has taken away one of the most important issues that Republicans won elections on in 2024. The border was wide open. Millions of people were coming across the border. We didn't know who they were. There was an estimated 1.7 million so-called gotaways. These are people that pay a premium to the cartels to go through a section of the border to where they could escape detection. They even give them carpet to put under their shoes so they can't be traced. These are not angels. These are people that are paying cartels a premium to come across the border. The other people just simply come to a border crossing, present themselves, and they can seek asylum. Bad people, all right? I get that. They should be apprehended, incarcerated, or deported. I simply asked 30 days ago, could you give me, of the 500 encounters in Charlotte, could you give me your data on it? Anonymized. I don't want the specific people unless they want to come forward. I want to know if you had an interaction with somebody. Were they illegally present? Were they a U.S. citizen? Did you detain them? Did you destroy their property in the process of detaining somebody briefly and come to find out, whoopsie, they've been a U.S. citizen for 20 years? That's important performance information. That's called job performance assessment. Why can't I get that for the 500 or so encounters in Charlotte, town that's 20 minutes from where I live? And then I get a letter an hour before the hearing saying, no, that's confidential information. And then she has the audacity to come to a hearing and say they're a top-notch professional law enforcement organization. There is not a law enforcement organization in the United States of America that couldn't answer that question for me. So which one is it? Have you even failed to keep track of all these encounters, or are you refusing to provide it to me because you're concerned with the results? That the minority of the people that you're probably detaining are the ones who are bad people that should be detained, deported, or incarcerated. I just want to know what the success rate is. And she refused to answer that question. So, Mr. President, I announced in the hearing today that similar to what I had to do to get the Homeland Security Secretary to even come before the committee, I had to put a hold on any sorts of nominations that went through Homeland Security. Maybe it had an influence, maybe other pressures got her there. But now she's not answering my questions. So effective today, I will refuse to allow any en bloc nominations to go through this Senate floor until I get my questions answered. Effective today. Effective on March 19th, I will block any nomination, any markup of legislation that goes before finance, banking, judiciary, or Veterans Affairs. I will block my own nominations until I get the answer to the question, and every other one that goes through that, because my vote is necessary in any partisan votes to get it out of the committees. I want answers to questions. That's what you give to a U.S. Senator. You don't treat us like some sort of person that you just placate in a committee and go on and do other things. I've got the election certificate. I've got people in North Carolina that want answers, and I want answers. And if I don't get them, we're simply going to shut down the noms process until we can get somebody to answer my question. Now, the questions I'm not going to cover that have to do with the encounters, that's delineated in a letter, Mr. President. But these are 5 other questions that I want answered. And they go like this because I want them in the Federal Register, and I'll submit a document so that the transcription is accurate. The Homeland Security Act, these are my 5 questions. The Homeland Security Act of 2002 expressly prohibits the Secretary of Homeland Security from restricting or diverting FEMA resources from the agency's mission. Based on your disaster response, I have a reason to believe that she's violating the law, either knowingly or unknowingly. So I want to know what the total amount of FEMA reimbursements are that are currently being held by DHS for final approval to be spent by FEMA. I want the exact dollar figures, and I want a full list of the recipients. Based on recent reports, I have reason to believe that DHS has delegated responsibilities of FEMA administrator to an outside contractor who is Kara Voorhees. What is her official role in DHS? That's my second question. My third question, special government employees, SGEs, are prohibited by law from working more than 130 days during any 365-day period. How many days has Corin Lewandowski worked over the last year? And how many days does he currently have left under the SGE status? Number 4, Why does Corey Lewandowski have final sign-off authority on internal DHS routing documents? These are internal routing documents above the Deputy Secretary, a part-time unpaid person above a Deputy Secretary before documents are submitted to the Homeland Security Secretary for approval. 5, based on an unclassified letter submitted to Congress yesterday by the DHS Office of Inspector General. These are the people that keep us honest. They're a very important part of the role. I have reason to believe that the Secretary and the Department are obstructing or at least one criminal investigation. Not my words. These are the words of the Office of Inspector General, who published a letter yesterday. That's almost unheard. Do you have any idea how bad it has to be for someone embedded in a department to publish a letter about the obstruction of the Secretary of that department? That's bad, folks. So, I want the Secretary to answer the question. Do you believe that restricting or delaying the Inspector General's access to documents, systems, and witnesses reflects the direct violation of federal law? The OIG thinks she does. So I want to know. Mr. President, I know we're 2 minutes away from going into recess, and I'm not going to extend time. Bottom line, this Secretary has done our President an injustice by some of the most incompetent execution I've had the displeasure to witness over the last 11 years and 2 months that I've been a U.S. Senator. It bears no resemblance to Trump 1 in terms of Homeland Security and in terms of FEMA response. I am a Republican. I support this President, and I believe deporting people illegally present here is critically important to our future. But I also believe you have to be able to execute. You have to be able to do your job. You have to be able to be responsible, and when you make a mistake, you admit it and move on. And this Secretary has done none of that. And so I will be doing none of nominating and confirming and markups until such time as I get an answer to these critical questions, or her resignation, or the answer to the question, whichever comes first. Thank you, Mr. President.